Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation, Advanced Patent Analytics, taking a look into the digital crystal ball. I am Gail Martin, Associate Marketing Manager at LexisNexis IP, and I want to cover a couple of things before we get started. Please feel free to submit questions during the webinar by using the Q&A feature. You can download a copy of the slides after the webinar has finished. These and a link to the recording from today's presentation will also be sent to you. Now, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Quinn. Jean is the founder of IPWatchdog.com, a patent attorney, law professor, and leading commentator on patent law and innovation policy. Jean was recently named one of the world's leading IP strategists by IAM for the second consecutive year. Joining him is Marko Richter. Marko is the head of consulting and customer success at PatentSight, a LexisNexis IP company. Marko has a strong consulting background in patent analytics, providing insights into dozens of projects to Fortune 500 and DAX companies. As a strategic consultant, he has guided the transition of many patent departments to turn from an administrative patent function into an internal consulting unit. Thank you again, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Jean.
Thanks a lot, Gail, and thank you all for being here today and spending a portion of your Monday with us. We have on tap a very interesting conversation about what you can learn from patent analytics. And this is going to be a different conversation. I think we're going to see that there is an awful lot of hidden intelligence that you can really learn about companies that you probably wouldn't have thought maybe that you would be able to learn. At least when I was going through this and seeing what can be learned, my eyes opened up wide and I could see a wide array of potential applications. So what I'd like to do is, Marko, I'd like to, before we get really started substantively with the slides and the conversation, I'd like to ask you if you could give us your preliminary thoughts, if you will. What is it that you'd like people to have in mind before we start the substantive conversation? What do you want them to be thinking about as we dive into this topic?
Thank you, Jean. When people think about patents and patent analytics, they often bring up the thought of patents are something from the past, something a company did 18 months ago, and it's not very telling of what a company is after today or even tomorrow. And I would like to show people today that indeed patents could offer you a look into the future instead of just giving a view on the company's past and history.
Great. Now, I think that, a lot of times we say that can happen, but I think when we're talking about big data, it can get in the way sometimes. So let's just jump into it and see what we have here, because I think once people start to see some of the slides and how this can actually operate, we'll get a better sense of it, and questions will start to flow through. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to shoot them our way, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we possibly can. So go ahead, Marko.
Thank you. So if we say that patents can give you a look into technologies or our company's future, we need to think about why is it important that patent analytics matter. And just to give a brief catch up here for everybody on the line is I want to say that if a company owns a key patent on a relevant technology, it is something that you basically aim for when you think of all the R&D investments that are being made each year. There's about $2.2 trillion spent worldwide on R&D, and the ultimate outcome of that is that I, as a company, have exclusive control over an invention that I could commercialize. Ideally, as it's stated here, it's a key patent on a relevant technology, and I'm able to turn it into a commercially successful product. And that, in turn, will lead to my company being successful and showing strong increases in stock price funded by maximized revenues, and so on and so forth. Now, as I said, $2.2 trillion spent each year. What does it convert to in terms of patents, and why is that potentially creating a challenge? Well, it's a sheer amount of patents that are filed. We have an example here from 2016 where we see that over 3 million patent applications were filed. We can all agree that this is way too much to read, to comprehend, and even if we were able to, we'd have to continuously read and monitor these patents to make sure we're not missing out on any trends, because the assessment we made 5 months ago might be a completely different one if we read a patent with today's knowledge. Now, on top of that, we know from scientific research that most of these patents have no or low commercial value. Now, scientific research frequently shows that 70 to 80% of all patents worldwide have a rather low impact from a commercial standpoint. To put an additional layer of challenges on patent analytics, we need to take a quick look at patent data itself. And it starts with the data that you get. So patent information in principle is publicly available, but it's far away from being ready for any kind of meaningful analysis, or let's say even boardroom analysis. Yeah, it's even further away from being ready for to be presented to the CEO or CTO of a company. What are these challenges? Well, it's mainly incomplete ownership information, it's ambiguous legal status information, and it's also simply a lot of errors in translations and misspellings. Now, what would we have? What if we had a database that had clear point in time information on whether a patent is dead or alive, or a database that would have the correct ownership information on a patent, or a database that would have a meaningful way of benchmarking individual patents or patent portfolios against each other? Let me give you an example of how such a world could look like. In this first example, the first half of the example that I'm going to show to you, we're looking at a very classic way of doing patent statistics, so to say. So what we see on the screen right now is the number of patents being filed per year, and what all these lines and the patents associated with them have in common is they build on the portfolio of Swiss watchmaker Swatch. We're all pretty familiar, one of the largest watch producers in the world. And from an analytics point of view, there's nothing to be taken away from this kind of analysis. Basically a patent haystack. My little daughter would call this a spaghetti graph. Yeah, nothing we could see. Now, I talked about meaningful indicators. I talked about good legal status and ownership information and point-in-time data. Now, let's turn this chart into exactly that. Let's look at this through the lens of LexisNexis PatentSight. And all of a sudden, a clear trend becomes visible. We're looking at the exact same data right now. The only things that have changed is, instead of the number of patents that we were counting before on the y-axis, we're now looking at the quality of the patents. So we're evaluating the patents at each point in time. Instead of looking at the filing dates, the first dates that the invention was filed at, we're looking at the reporting date. So we're evaluating patents at the point in time based on information available at that point in time. And instead of just looking at cleaned applicants, we're looking at PatentSight's ownership information, PatentSight's ultimate owner information. And all of a sudden, a clear trend becomes visible. And does anybody in the audience have an idea what company we're looking at? And Gene, you could be so kind and see if we're getting any answers on that.
Yeah, we have not yet, but when you asked me that question during the original time when I was going through this information, I was able to figure it out pretty quickly. Nobody seems to be taking a stab at it. So
So I'm wearing the exact product that we're basically seeing here. Because what we're seeing behind this line here is the rise of the Apple Watch. So what we're looking at here is the quality of Apple's patents trying to solve similar problems to what the Swiss watchmaker's watch is doing. And we're seeing this trend starting basically in the year that the first iPhone was launched. So back then, Apple already had technologies in their portfolio that were taking a good look at similar problems that Swatch was trying to solve at that point in time. And this continued even further, as we see here, first rumors that Apple might be working on a wearable device by 2011. And by 2015, there was the official announcement that the Apple Watch was coming. Now, when we're looking at this chart here, we can see that 8 years before Apple officially announced the product, we could see a clear trend in patents. Now, if we travel back in time, we wouldn't have been able to tell you that Apple is working on a watch and that it will be a super successful product. But what we could already see is that Apple was working on something that in turn was very, very interesting for third parties at the point in time, and that gives us a good hint at that whatever Apple is after there, it has the potential to be successful. And in this case, this potential converted into a $7 billion product that the Apple Watch is, and that's an estimate from last year. It will probably be well beyond that number right now in terms of turnover. And to put that into context, the entire Swiss watch industry, which Swatch is part of, is coming in at a $20 billion turnover per year. So right off the bat, Apple created a product that is 1/3 of an entire industry in a country. So that is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I do want to just interrupt you.
Yeah.
Apparently, a lot of people were able to guess that it was Apple. So I apologize. I wasn't able to see the Q&A box, and now I've it's refreshed, and we had not everybody, but a lot of people did guess. So my apologies to those of you who did accurately. Yeah.
And what's also interesting about this, if we would look at this through our software, we could also do further analysis and see that something that academics call technology spillover, because what we could see is that Apple is taking classic watch technologies and is applying them in an entirely new space. And if you look at the Apple Watch, it is new. It is doing something different than a classic watch. It has no mechanics in it whatsoever, not what you'd have in a classic watch. Okay, now.
So wait a minute, Marko. We have a question here. I think you used the term reporting date. So somebody was asking, what do you mean by reporting date?
So reporting date allows us to travel back in time. It goes far beyond the capabilities of filing dates or publication dates or priority years, which are most common when it comes to patent statistics, I would rather call it, the old-fashioned way of doing patent analytics. Reporting dates deliver us point-in-time data. So we're looking at, for example, the patents active at a given point in time and looking at the evaluation that patents had at that point in time based on the citations they had received. Think of it like an end-of-year reporting date for a company like General Electric. For the 31st of December, they're reporting on their assets, they're reporting on their turnover, and so on and so forth. And that doesn't change when you go forward into the future. So if I look up General Electric's numbers for 2010, this is the numbers that I get for 2010. And that's what we're basically mimicking here in the patent space. It is a fundamental step for us to connecting IP with business, because business people are used to point-in-time data. They're used to looking at trends just like a stock ticker trend. Yeah. So just like a stock ticker shows you information or shows you the value of a company based on information that was available back at the point in time that you look at, we do that for patents and patent portfolios.
And then the other question, and I think we're going to get to this more in depth throughout the rest of it, but just to plant the seed, we have a number of people asking about quality and how that is determined. So do you want to say anything about that here now a little bit?
That's perfect for me, because the next thing to do is to explain how all this analysis is made possible through our database, and part of that is how we determine quality.
Yeah, and as before you get into that, I
Yeah.
just wanted, when I saw that graph about Swatch,
Yeah.
I thought to myself, obviously that is just, if you could have known that back then, and you would see business people would see that uptick, that the intelligence that could have given to Swiss watchmakers, or Swatch in particular, or Rolex, or any number of other companies, right? That would have been incredibly valuable, because you see that uptick years before Apple even announces, or there's even rumors that they're going to be entering the marketplace.
Yeah, exactly. And Gene, you would be surprised how many companies don't realize what's going on in the immediate vicinity of their portfolio. Basically, every time you show a head of IP or a CTO, who are the players around you that are heavily building on you, and especially that are heavily building on you with valuable technologies? There's at least 1 or 2 surprises even in the top 10 companies that you look at. And that sparks a whole series of analysis that they then do internally. And that leads to lawsuits, it leads to licensing deals, it leads to maybe even acquisitions, because they find a small player that is super active in their vicinity and that ideally complements their portfolio. And yeah, definitely very, very interesting.
Yeah. And now, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you've been going through this data a lot in a number of different areas of technology and innovation, but it seems like that's even more important now, because it seems like we're starting to see increasingly innovative companies bleed into each other, whether it be with the driving, whether it be with banking, whether it be here now with wearables, and maybe it's the whole Internet of Things is the communicating between devices. Everybody seems to be bumping into everybody else. So having your eye on what others are doing in non-traditional competitors seems to be all the more important. So that's what I observe. Is that really what the patent data seems to be suggesting as well?
Absolutely, and you're talking about a topic that we were planning on bringing up in one of the following webinars, and that wasn't even introduced to you yet. It's the whole topic basically of digitalization and how boundaries between classic industries are fading away. In the past, as a chemical company, you knew what was going on in the chemical space. As an automotive company, you basically knew what was going on, but lines and borders have become more blurry and blurry, and they're being ignored by new entrants, and they're definitely being ignored by digital technology, which starts to interconnect basically all technology fields. In the past, you could think of this all as nicely separated, but now the technology landscape out there is more like a matrix, and even worse, like a matrix in 3D. So it becomes a huge challenge for companies to stay on top of the developments around what they are doing themselves, or what even the competitors are doing, because it's not just yourself that you have to look after, it's everyone around you and the new entrants that are popping up literally on a day-by-day basis.
Okay, so I would just say stay tuned for that follow-up webinar. That's a good tease, which I didn't even know it was going to be a tease. But let's get to the quality stuff, because I don't want to take too much more time, because I definitely want to make sure we get to the Palantir stuff, because that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah. All right. So what do we do at PatentSight to make all these analytics possible, and basically make it also ready for the boardroom? So first of all, we collect worldwide patent information. We bring it into our database, and it converts into well over 100 million patent documents. And one step that is super important for us is building patent families. In the beginning of PatentSight, we spent over 9 months just benchmarking all the different patent family definitions that are out there to find the right one that provides meaningful results for patent analytics. And for all the specialists that are listening in, it's the simple family definition that we settled on. But I'm bringing that up to show how much detail we're into in order to make sure that what we're doing brings the right results. because everything we do on top of this database is depending on if all the smallest pieces are in the right place. And one super important piece for us is patent family definitions. And after we've built the patent families, we're making sure of two fundamental things. We're checking, first of all, on the legal status of all the documents in the family, and then on a family level, get to a conclusion whether this patent family is alive or not at any given point in time, as we have the reporting date concept that lets us travel back in time. And the second thing is the ultimate owner concept. So we have a huge team of data scientists that do nothing else day in and day out to assign the patents to their correct owner. And we have native speakers in basically all important patent languages: Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Russian, English, of course, German, French, that do primary research on top of sourced in corporate tree data, et cetera, et cetera. What our clients frequently tell us about these two steps that we do in the process, the legal status information and the ownership information, that we bring unparalleled quality here to the market. To put this a little bit into context, one of the largest technology companies in the world, Philips from the Netherlands, has said about our ultimate owner concept that that only that piece of information saves them more than 2 man-years each year in their analyst team when they're doing their patent analytics. And that's a huge impact. They have better data than before in a much faster way than they were able to get that. Now, this is all happening. This is all data collection and cleaning of data, including manual cleaning of data. Now, the last piece we saw in the analysis of the Apple Watch example was the evaluation of patents and the quality. And I don't want to go into too much detail here. Just a brief explanation of how the patent asset index, a scientifically proven and scientifically validated methodology of evaluating individual patents, but also entire patent portfolios, works. It is built on two main indicators. One is called technology relevance. The other one is called market coverage. Just in a nutshell, technology relevance looks at forward citations, but takes care of 3 major fallacies that are associated with forward citations. One is the time problem. So older patents get more frequently cited than younger patents. The other problem is different technology fields. We want to make sure that we're comparing apples with apples and not apples with pears. And the third issue with forward citation analytics is patent office citation practices. So we see different practices at offices worldwide, and we have to correct for that. Now, the sweet thing here is we let the data correct itself. So everything is basically corrected through averages in the data. So we divide by average number of citations in a technology field, by average number of citations made per search report, per publication per year, and so on and so forth. To come up with a technology relevance score that tells us how much more relevant is the patent that I'm looking at compared to peer patents. And that translates into, let's say, a score of 10. So that means the patent we're evaluating is 10 times more relevant than the average patent in its field. Very nice and simple. So simple that CEOs of companies understand it and feel comfortable of putting the patent asset index in their annual report, because they feel like they're able to explain this methodology to an investor in a review call. That is something very important to note here. It's a super simple approach that works fabulously. And if this was a black box, no CEO in the world would put that in the annual report. It's nothing you would dare to communicate, anything that you can't explain. Now that's technology relevance. Market coverage, on the other hand, looks at the worldwide markets that a patent is covering, and we're using the GNI, the gross national income as provided by the World Bank, to estimate the size of these markets. And to give you just a rough idea of what that translates to into when it comes to patents, a patent family that is active in the US and China and is granted in both jurisdictions would translate into a market coverage of 1.6, because we take the US economy as the benchmark for all other countries. China is roughly 60% of the US economy at the moment, but strongly growing. Then we multiply the two indicators, technology relevance and market coverage, to come up with a competitive impact score, so the overall strength of the patent family. We multiply because we take dead patents out of the equation here. Market coverage would go to 0, and then in a multiplication with technology relevance, it would lead to 0 competitive impact, and to put a higher weight on technology relevance. Market coverage has a natural limit, technology relevance hasn't. So competitive impact gives us the overall strength of a patent family, and all the summed up competitive impact scores of a family would give us the patent asset of a patent portfolio, would give us the patent asset index of this portfolio. It could be the entire patent asset index of a company like General Electric, or of just General Electric in autonomous driving, for example, if they had any patents there. I think from a methodology and what's working behind the scenes perspective, we should have covered most of the bases. Once again, and very important as we go forward, this is a completely late open methodology, no black box. And that is key reason why this approach has been adopted worldwide, not just by companies, but also by authorities. For example, the European Commission that has used it intensively in the evaluation of the Bayer-Monsanto and the Dow-DuPont mergers in the last 2 years. And that's the next example I'd like to show. And again, this is also a teaser on one of the upcoming webinars where we're going to look into an 80 billion merger that is happening in the pharma industry as we speak. Just a very quick one here on Bayer-Monsanto and Dow-DuPont. I love this Bloomberg headline, which says that Dow-DuPont has shown us that innovation is the new EU's M&A battleground. And the European Commission has used PatentSight and the Patent Asset Index very intensively in their investigation of the mergers of these 4 companies. And it was a fundamental piece of the argumentation of the European Commission why all merging parties had to divest fundamental parts of their entities, translating into billion-dollar sales of assets.
So, Marko, when you say that this is all laid open, and I know with the European Commission using it, obviously they've had to convince themselves that this data represents something that is factually accurate and correct. But if somebody wanted to see more about it, because what would they do, or how could they go about that?
Mm-hmm. There's a scientific publication on the Patent Asset Index which explains all the details, which I've gone through in a nutshell now, in much more depth. So everybody's welcome to read the 15-pager or 16-pager that was out there in World Patent Information back in 2011. I think we even have a download available on our website.
Yeah. So I just want to say to folks, when this seems to be thoroughly vetted and adopted and relied upon. There's companies that are using this in their annual report to shareholders, and there are governments that are using this to make decisions. So this is not just something that somebody is like looking at a patent and say, oh, this is quality or that's quality, or we're trying to make subjective value judgments. There really is science behind this, and if you're interested in that, you can download that and read that further. But that is because it is open. I don't want to say it's not open source, but because it is open to everybody to look at and see how these numbers are achieved, and that's why the countries and the authorities are able to rely on it in their decision-making process. So there's a lot of effort that has gone into this, many years of development. Correct, Marko?
Yeah, definitely many years. As I said, 9 months of testing different family definitions, and don't ask me of all the man years going into harmonization and legal status cleaning and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of knowledge that we put into this database to basically, yeah, to make it a turnkey solutions for users to use in their everyday, patent analytics life. From a, even from an not just from a strategic use case perspective, but also from a very operational one.
Yeah, and I think if you did try it, and I'd encourage people to do this, to try it out, and I think it would match your subjective idea of what is quality in the industry. It certainly has matched my idea of what is quality. And I know, everybody's idea is different about what is quality, what's not quality, and so forth. But I think if you give this a test drive, you're going to find that it will match when put to the test. It's going to match your expectations.
Yeah. One nice validation that the European Commission did, by the way, is they looked, and this is all public information that I'm citing. I'm citing a 900-page report written up by the Commission. And what they did is they looked at the key patents from a patent asset index perspective in the Dow DuPont portfolios, and they matched these to what are the most important products, the value drivers of these companies. So where are they generating most of their revenue? And they saw in their analysis that the key patents that the patent asset index picked out were actually protecting all the top products, so those that generate all the revenues. So that was a very nice cross-validation that the patent asset index is super successful in picking up the revenue drivers of a company.
So, Marko, are we about ready to jump into the software now, or do we have? Okay.
I would like to introduce the Palantir case here in PowerPoint quickly and then go into the software.
Okay. So I have a question, and I don't know, this may be a better question to address after, but I'll throw it out there and let you decide. Yep. The question is, hindsight is great, but at what point in time would have the analytics been able to pick up the trends?
Good question. If I would go back to the Apple Watch example, I could have started thinking about what is going on as from a Swatch point of view. I could have started to think about what's going on, what is Apple after, basically by 2009, years ahead of time when Apple was announcing the product or when there were even rumors out there that Apple was working on a wearable device. But it's hard to give like an average number. And I guess we will also find cases where patents have not been able, or where it's not as easily visible to see that that something is going on. Okay, we've seen the trend scouting use case with the Apple Watch example, and we've seen a use case in M&A and due diligence with the European Commission's example. But the main use case for tonight in the Palantir analysis will basically be benchmarking and competitive intelligence. We want to get an understanding of how is Palantir performing from an investor's perspective. If we take a look at their technology, at the technology portfolio that they have, the patents that they have, how are they on an upward trajectory, downward trajectory, what's going on in their portfolio. And Palantir is basically the most awaited IPO in the Silicon Valley this year. Palantir is one of the most secretive companies. Also, nobody really knows what they're after. They're very, very secretive. They're founded and backed by Peter Thiel, one of the Valley's most successful investors. He's also the guy behind PayPal. And currently, they're estimating an IPO valuation of $41 billion. And to put that into perspective, that is that is a huge multiple over their 750 million revenue. It's it's totally unseen and unheard of when it comes to IPOs to have such a high upside on what the company is currently actually doing in terms of revenues. So the key question is a 55 revenue multiple justified? Is there anything in the technology perspective that would speak against that? And with that, let's take a quick look at a first analysis on what is going on around Palantir, and then go over into the software. What we see here on screen right now is a rather broad analysis on big data analytics, the main place where Palantir is active in. Palantir as a company has been active in big data aggregation and analytics, mainly working with governmental institutions and large corporations. Some of the rumors around Palantir is, for example, that they helped the United States in finding Osama bin Laden. None of that is proven, but that is the kind of myth that's going on around Palantir and why it's so interesting to look into them. Now, when we see this here, we're seeing the active number of patents on the x-axis, the average quality in these companies' portfolio on the y-axis, and we're seeing that the Amazons and Alphabets, they're pretty much aligned in terms of quality. Alphabet with a much larger portfolio, and Amazon here with the largest patent asset index, so the bubble size, the most the portfolio with the most overall footprint. Now, when we bring Palantir into the picture, we see that they have a rather small portfolio compared to the big players here in big data analytics, but highly influential. And to put that into perspective for the participants of the webinar tonight, this top left corner with a high competitive impact, that's where you typically see the disruptors in a space. That's where you see Tesla in certain car industry analysis, or where you see Dyson when it comes to household appliances. That's where you see Apple in the early days of the smartphone, and so on and so forth. So this top left corner is basically where you see new entrants popping up that are set to change the course of maybe even an entire industry. So looking at this analysis, Palantir for an investor is definitely in the place they want to be with the size of their portfolio. Compare them to Splunk, also a player active in big data analytics, also startup company. They're not as influential on average. That's what we can definitely take away from this. So with that, let's go into the software. And what you see on screen right now is PatentSight Business Intelligence. It runs as a software as a service solution and lets you access all worldwide patents without any limitations. So there's no artificial limitations to the number of patents that you're analyzing, or the number of companies you're analyzing, or the number of patents that you import, export out of the system. It is a system built to put every user of it in the driver's seat and have basically no boundaries for that user. On the left side here, I have a search panel where I could basically define my search, the set of analysis that I'm interested in, and then I have various visualizations here around different use cases that help me make sense of my data. And with that, let's take a first quick look at Palantir here. And what we see, we have selected Palantir as an owner here on the left-hand side. You can also quickly look at the company info box of Palantir, where all the information is aggregated together that we might want to need for a quick first look. But what we see in the first analysis here is just a filing year analysis, what you would basically do in even publicly available data sources for patents. You could look at the number of patents filed by an applicant. Now here it's already aggregated to our current owner, so we have highly cleaned, even manually cleaned the data on Palantir, and we can see how many patents they filed per year, but even now split into if they're pending, in force, or inactive. On the right-hand side, we compare that to where are they active in the world, so we can get it already an understanding of where they mostly file for their patents. Gene, did you want to raise a question?
Well, I do. We have a number of people talking about how what this seems to be is that detecting emerging trends after they've emerged and not predicting emerging trends. And I mean, on some level, I get that, but I'd have to tend to disagree with that myself. Right? I mean, on the first instance, and I guess maybe what this is to some extent relating to the fact that when we advertised, we said like this is like looking into a crystal ball. Well, before something happens, you know, we're not like Karnak or, you know, there really is, you know, magic is not real. Apologies to people who believe in Hogwarts, but so there has to be something that's happening for people to look at in order to see, to make any kind of predictions to begin with. So I think what made me think that this is incredibly valuable is that when you look at Apple's portfolio and you just look at any company, the technical reality is that the patents are filed many years before these things start to come to fruition. And when you look at this, the Swatch example, you could have if you were Swatch and you were looking at a broad base of competitors and included Apple in that, you would have noticed that they were dipping their toe in your space, you know, 4 years or 5 years before there was even the first rumor that they were going to be interested in wearables, and some 8 years or more, 9 years before the Apple Watch hit the market. So to that extent, I think it really is a crystal ball. So this is something that we've talked about for a very long time. And this is, I think, why there are so many blogs and articles and publications that follow Apple specifically, right? You know, they patent a whole lot of stuff. Their patents are usually very good, and everybody is trying to figure out, well, what direction is Apple going in? Well, it's not just Apple that you can figure out insights about, right? I mean, it's a lot of companies provide that information, and you know, sometimes it's hidden in the patent, and if you're not really looking for it, you can't find it. But with big data, you can find it, right?
Yep. And just to add to that Apple's Watch example, at least the data is telling me that there is something going on. The question is then at the point in time to figure out what is going on and take the right decisions. And we've not just seen the Apple's Watch example. We had a great example from a project. We do a lot of consulting projects too for our customers. We had a great example back in 2012 in the medtech space, where we told our client about the medtech field that we were analyzing for them. We told them there's certain Silicon Valley companies heavily investing in the space around the tech field that you're interested in. So basically, they were citing this tech field heavily. And we made that as a key part of our board presentation. So there was besides the yada yada benchmark, these are the strongest players in your field, here is what's going on outside of your field that you should be aware of. Now, this analysis was heavily discussed at the client, on a board level even, and till today, they keep telling us we made the wrong decision. So we had the data, we had the right indications, but at the end of the day, ultimately, the client came up with the wrong consequences, wrong solutions out of that. So we pointed it out, but they couldn't figure out. They didn't dream about what could these Silicon Valley companies do in my medtech space. And now we see, for example, the Apple Watch being a heartbeat sensor, right, or a pulse sensor, and now turning with Generation 4 into a heart rate monitor. Yeah. So it's ultimately, till now, depends also on the humans taking the right decisions out of the insights that the data can generate for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, I don't know about others, but I think that this is, you know, pretty remarkable. And certainly if I was in a C-suite, I would want to see this stuff.
Definitely. At least it's a data point that adds to your knowledge. and you have to connect it to other data points that you have to then come to a decision. And it's definitely better seeing this data point than not seeing this data point. Okay, let's go on with Palantir. The visualization we've seen before, comparing them to the entire space of big data analytics, we've bolted down here to just the Palantir portfolios, all the active patents that they have today. And what we can do using PatentSight and the reporting date concept, we can track the development of this portfolio over time here as it has developed over the past 10 years in this case. Company's rather young. And we've seen that they're on a really nice trajectory. So again, from an investor's perspective, when I would sit down with Palantir as one of the big investment banks, this is something positive that this patent analytics shows to me. They're able to grow the number of protected technologies over time and increase even in quality. That is something that you typically don't see, because what typically happens as you grow in size, average quality goes down. It's just the nature of the thing, and it's not just with patents. It's basically with most things in life. And this is a trajectory that typically only companies like Qualcomm or so are able to pursue, like continuously putting out high-value patents that are picked up by third parties as influential. And that's basically what we're seeing here with Palantir. And once again, as an investor, that's a trajectory that I like to see. Now, we were wondering, could we break it down further and get some more insights on what Palantir's after and what their interests lie in? And what we've done is we've built similarity search and clustering search here within the Palantir portfolio, and have grouped the patents here according to certain technology areas that Palantir is pursuing. And we came up with several different clusters of patents, user interaction, managing large data sets, network risks, and so on and so forth. And there's two things that are most interesting here as we look at the development of these clusters in the Palantir portfolio over time. One thing is, in the very beginning, they were mainly focusing here on managing large data sets with their patents. So the technologies in their portfolio were mainly focusing on this and on automatic analysis. You can see it made up over 70% of their entire portfolio strength back in 2008. But this has been replaced by user interaction as the predominant technology in their portfolio. And this is very much in line with the mission statement of Palantir, which basically says that they are not there to replace human intelligence, but to enhance human intelligence through big data analytics. And what you basically need when you do big data analytics and want a human to draw all the insights out of it is user interaction. And for a user to be able to access that data, you need an interface and so on and so forth. And the second thing that's interesting here, apart from user interaction becoming more and more predominant technology in this portfolio, is the rise of new fields of interests in their portfolio. So network risks becomes more interesting, or data integration, or security and access control also becomes more interesting for Palantir and more important, rather on the low level here with about 5% of their entire portfolio strength, but it is something that they're investing in where they're building technologies in. Now, each of these lines basically represents a cluster of patents, and of course, I could drill down into any of these data points in any of these years to see which patents were active at that point in time, what these patents look like. Yeah, so that's no problem. Everything is readily available. Just one click, drill down, and get all the information behind each data point. And this is totally in line with what we do at PatentSight and the patent asset index in our database. It's a completely laid open approach, and so is the software. The software is not just very flexible, it's also very open and interactive. It reacts to what the user wants to do, and it shows the user also all the secret elements, underneath the data point, or secret, let's say, not shown elements underneath the data point. In this case, individual patent families. Gene, anything you'd like to add here, or?
Well, the one thing that I would say here, that we did talk about is, like, with respect to like, for example, the purple line that seems to start in at about 2014 relating to data integration.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's nice, I think, about this particular chart is, and this is maybe not, nice for, again, the C-suite, or if you're the patent person or chief patent counsel and you're trying to explain something to the C-suite, or you're an investor or on the board of directors and you just really need to try and understand what's going on. This kind of tells you right exactly when they started to really get involved in data integration. And you could start to ask, okay, well, why weren't we involved in it earlier? I mean, and there's probably a logical reason. Or you could ask, well, why are we involved in it? And if it's important, why were we only involved in it a little bit in 2014, and now are we involved in it more now? And that's, obviously that makes sense, right? Because you ramp these technologies up. But there's a lot of questions that the novice person who is interested, probably on the board of directors or somebody in the C-suite, could ask about this, and it really would tell a lot. And I think it would enable a real meaningful conversation, because one of the webinars we did in the past, and we probably need to redo it again, is how do you convey information from the IP department up the line and get the people who need to understand it to really understand it. And I think this chart is a real interesting way to do that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for that. Once we had seen the development of these clusters, and also to provide a little bit of the red thread here for our participants tonight, we were wondering about these different clusters and how interesting are they possibly for third parties. So basically mimicking here what we did with the Swatch example, where we looked at who are the players building on Swatch. We now want to get an understanding of who are the players building on Palantir, and when doing so, which are the areas in Palantir's expertise that they are interested in. And that's what we're looking at here with the next chart, the technology metrics, where we get a breakdown of the different technologies that Palantir has in its portfolio and how they're being cited by some other companies that are also trying to solve similar problems. And once again, we see Apple here, and it makes total sense that Apple is heavily building on Palantir in the field of user interaction. User interaction is basically what redefined smartphone when Apple brought out the iPhone. It was a completely new way of making the user interact with that telephone in their hands. And it's what their core expertise is up until today. Now, what else does it tell us? That obviously what Palantir and Apple are doing here is very similar. So Palantir is trying to solve similar problems to what Apple's doing. From an investor's point of view, I'd say this is not a bad thing in general, because Apple is doing a lot of things right when it comes to user interaction. From an investor's point of view, it's also interesting to see in general who's building on the various technologies. Is there maybe a licensing potential that Palantir has not yet uncovered, or is there maybe even a licensing threat that Palantir is facing, as they're maybe too close to what certain other players are doing? What else is interesting here? We see different patterns. So for example, when you look at uptake, it compares pretty much to a pattern we see also with Samsung, IBM, and Alphabet, except for automatic clustering, which doesn't seem to be interesting for uptake, at least not the way that Palantir is trying to solve that. It's also interesting to see that automatic clustering is the most important field here for Microsoft, which totally makes sense in all their big data, machine learning, and so on approaches. And again, whatever we're looking at here, goes all back to individual patent families that we could readily drill down into by simply clicking on this bubble or going to the next 10 companies or next 50 companies. So as a user, I could easily just page through the data here and try to make more sense out of it or visualize it as an analysis over time.
Yes. So is that the last thing that you wanted to go through, or?
Based on Palantir, definitely was the last thing that we were planning to share tonight. Apart from that, just to showcase a little bit of the capabilities of the system, we could easily look at the top 25 players worldwide or top 50 or anything. As I said, the database is super versatile in what it can do. So
we do have one question I think would be relevant. It's
yeah.
Does this mean that priority date is 18 months before the reporting date, since the patents would not be public?
So for each report, let me rephrase it. For each reporting date, we're only showing patents that are active at that date, and that also means that were known to be published at that point in time already. So when I look at 2000 reporting date 2010, and let me maybe go back here on the tech cluster trend. So let's pick this point in time here, 2010, this line. There we have 4 active patents in that cluster. Now in 2018, we have 28 active patents in that cluster. So for 2010, we only look at what was already known to be published at that point in time, and we evaluated only on citations available at that point in time and on the worldwide coverage that the family had at that point in time. So it's a true historic data point.
Okay. All right. We're getting. I mean, there's so many different questions. I think we've covered a lot of them here. One of the, let's see. A lot of the questions are pretty specific about how to actually use this, and is there prior art or companies' patents that build on Palantir's?
Yeah, there's tons of companies building on Palantir. That's what we basically saw in the technology metrics, with a breakdown per technology who's interested. In general, you can see here from the company info box on Palantir, the players that are building most heavily on Palantir. So for example, for A10 Networks, it makes up 10% of their entire company's portfolio that is building on Palantir. You could essentially you could slice and dice the data in any way that you like. And I heard the question before, also, or the comment where you said how to make use of that. We gladly sit down with each and everyone that joined the webinar tonight to discuss exactly that and put you in the driver's seat on how to utilize this software and make use of it in your own environment and for your own use cases.
Yeah, we have one person that asks about the learning curve. So if they were to try and start to use this, what kind of learning curve would a new user face in order to be able to do these things?
Basically, if the user has some is willing to invest a little bit of time and training, I would say at the end of a business day, very much able to do benchmarking analysis, M&A analysis, and so on and so forth. And that doesn't mean that we're training that person for 8 hours straight. It's getting them comfortable in the system, and then they make the first steps themselves and ask some questions back and so forth. It's a rather quick learning curve. And talking with 10 years of experience in teaching people on how to do patent analytics with PatentSight, I can gladly say we have yet to find somebody where we fail to train this or give this expertise to.
Yeah. So you do. So when somebody there's obviously training involved, I would guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the access to the system, you don't just you don't just access the data, you basically access all the expertise that we have on patent analytics. A lot of that is already baked into the data and how we clean it and how we make it ready for analysis. But it's also the ongoing expertise that we're building up here with all the user interaction that we have in projects and also in all these onboardings, trainings, and so on and so forth. We're also continuously researching in patent analytics. We're continuously publishing papers in the space and also creating white papers and so on and so forth. So we try to stay on the on the cutting edge here in terms of how to do patent analytics.
And this maybe, and I see we're running shorter on time, so this maybe will be the last question. But the question asked that we're using examples of companies that have a few hundred to a few thousand patents. Does the approach change when you're looking at companies with different size portfolios at all?
No, basically it's always this. So the approach is always the same, and it. I get that question rather often, like different sizes. Is that really fit for me? We're too big, we're too small, etc., etc. This basically runs for any size of company, and we even have customers with no patents at all, but that want to understand what's going on out there in the technology landscape. And the system lets you analyze all kind of patent data. I just put in here any IPC that I could just think of. This is some medical class, and look at how easily I got the top 10 players in the space, and also how nice and easy or how nice the data looks in terms of quality and everything aggregated to its current ultimate owner.
Yeah, and I lied because we got a really good question here at the end asking about the data set being clean in terms of assinees, legal status, dates, and I know we talked about that. So the data is very clean, and that's why the countries and authorities can rely on it, right?
Yes, exactly. So if the European Commission wants to analyze the mergers of players like Dow DuPont, they also have to know what does BASF own, what does Bayer own, what do all the other chemical players own, and they can't do that kind of primary research. And they tested our data and came to the conclusion we can rely on the quality of the data, also in terms of ownership, not just in terms of the patent asset index and the legal status that we provide. You get the whole package here, and it's this package that you need to do really this kind of advanced patent analytics.
Yeah, and this is a very different kind of analytics, I think, and it's very exciting. And I know we're out of time. We've only really scratched the surface here. But Marko, I want to give you one final chance to summarize and sum up. If there's one thing you want people to remember as they leave this webinar, what is that one thing?
That one thing would be that advanced patent analytics can help you understand what's going on, not just right now, but also tomorrow and in the future beyond that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for your questions. And I thank you all for, I see we have somebody suggested a topic already for another follow-up webinar. I like that. I think that would be very good to include. So we will do that. Have a good day, and we hope to see you on another webinar in the future. Thank you all for spending a portion of your Monday with us, and have a good day and a good night.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Gene. Bye-bye.
Bye.